I guess I'm live. How exciting. I guess while I wait, and probably the second I go to eat, somebody will um, somebody will log in or something like that. I said I was starting at 11, but I only told people like an hour ago, so oh, I already got a viewer. I've never done this before, so I have no idea how this actually works. I have no idea if people can see me. I hope they can. Um, and I'm here kind of celebrating Surf City Donuts. Season 1 is allegedly halfway through. Um, season 6 just posted. I'm currently working on the last bit of episodes 8 and then episode 9, um, which I'm working on more fully. It's really exciting. I said when I mapped out the season that there would be 12 episodes to it, and that was kind of arbitrary because I like round numbers. Um, but I feel like there might be a 13th episode or maybe even a 14th. I have lots of plot threads for season 1 I want to deal with, and I haven't gotten to at least one of them yet, really, or just started to. And so I am surprised, not necessarily by how big the world is getting, but I'm a little surprised by how the story is unfolding. If that makes sense, I have no idea if that makes any sense, but there you go. Um, yeah, yeah, so that's happening. Um, I think for me, when I think about Surf City Donuts, especially, it's the challenge of kind of doing it on my own. It has some references that make it easy to kind of map out what I want. I've got the Welcome to Night Vale, the Ray Bradbury, and I talk about that sometimes in the descriptions. There are a couple really great Ray Bradbury stories I haven't touched on, but definitely have some influence on it. And I have the books around here somewhere because I have a whole bunch of Ray Bradbury compilation books. Um, yeah, so I can talk about that. I'll happily talk about Disney. I've got my own Comic Con coming up. I can talk about my work with Rem Alternus creating Panabon if someone wants to hear about that. I just had a table read this past Tuesday, which was really cool for The Night Bloom, which is a gay desert fairy tale kind of in the vein of Aladdin, um, but with my own twist on it. It's very queer, and people really like how queer it is. Um, and I have a couple other things in the work. I'm working on Cinderella. If you followed my new Play Exchange, you've seen Cinderella, but I've been revamping that. For anyone who downloaded and read the second version, which is the version that got posted, or read the version that ended up on, what was that one? I did a novella version of it to practice out. I can't remember where I put that now. No, it's a very exciting time to write and be creative, and so I'm doing that. Yeah. Um, Happy to talk about Halloween. I love Halloween. um, Halloween influences a lot of what I do. I like the idea of kind of being able to change yourself, and I think as a gay man, especially, I've worn so many different kind of costumes or coats or colors, if you will, that it's hard not to recognize why, especially gay people love Halloween, but why all people love Halloween. So we can talk about Halloween a bit. Halloween influences pretty heavily into my work. I used to be a little reticent to say my work was science fiction because I always considered it more fantasy, more fairy tale, or really grounded in realism. So you either go all the way to Disney or you get like The Wire. Um, but as I've grown as an artist, my work has been more. It's kind of been moving in an interesting direction. Where as I move deeper into the queerness of the work itself becomes less mainstream. And on some pieces, especially, I've gotten some pushback on some things that people don't think is like morally okay. Um, and of course, I'm talking about Troop 274 and having the audacity of having queerness juxtaposed against this kind of Boy Scout jamboree camp thing. And it's set in a time period where there was no talk of consent, and there's a lot of talk of consent in this play, which I specifically did to offset that. And people still really get enraged by the idea of queerness in a capacity for mentorship in a positive way. And that really kind of blows my mind a little bit. That's still a conversation. Um, had some really great reviews on the table read otherwise. So it's one of those things where it's just something you want to keep working on. And you're, especially for Troop 274 being probably my most reactive piece, being aware that people have strong reactions to it. But I like strong reactions because a strong reaction is better than no reaction. Um, I can wait for people to see my Jesus, where Peter is a super out gay man that you meet while he's sunbathing nude. I can't wait for people to see that because I think that'll get people get really wild about that. Um, and I've been working on that for like a decade. So I'm gonna take out my headphones so don't hear me chewing, but I am watching still. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my new play exchange stuff if you like. The hazard of a lunchtime stream is at lunchtime. I thought I was going to be like done with lunch. I had the best of intentions to eat before this, and it just didn't happen. But that's okay. We're going to get through it together. Oh, I guess I could also talk about Dragula. I love Dragula. Um, yeah, I love Dragula, so I could talk about that. I saw the cast reveals, but I have a policy when I see a cast reveal, like for Drag Race or Project Runway or Dragula, not to be biased about it. I'm a little biased about Dragula actually, for a couple of reasons. I'm gonna mention, so I want to check that. Okay, yeah, I'm also gonna be on live stream tomorrow night with the Rem Alternus people. Um, and they're going to be 8 p.m. Central, and I think that just gets streamed through Twitch or YouTube. It gets streamed through somewhere, and I'll be talking about my Comic-Con experiences. So that's really cool. Yeah. They made me my own. If you're not in Rem Alternus in their Discord, they made my character their own little emoji, Panabon stabbing things, which is really great. It makes me smile every time I see it. Thank you, Rem people. They understand my chaotic vibe with Panabon, who is the first attempt at doing genderqueer D&D role playing for me because I'd never really done D&D seriously before, like Clockwork. Yeah, it's really hard. D&D is very gendered. It's very hard to do a they them character, and I haven't explored that much. Anyone that's been watching the Rem Alternus streams know that I haven't been exploring that much other than making sure pronouns are they them 80% of the time. I've gotten it 80% of the time. We've gotten really good at it. It was a little bit of a trial for for everybody at the beginning. I was surprised how gendered it was, though I don't suppose I should be. Um, it's been really great to see the D&D community and how that has learned how to be more accepting over time. Makes me really happy to be part of that. Um, yeah, okay. So Dracula. Um, I cannot help but be excited for Saint. Um, I was slightly skeptical until Resurrection about the idea of bringing someone back because I know Drag Race had done that, and I loved having Shangela back, but I felt like it got kind of like the idea of the word All Star that Project Runway and RuPaul's Drag Race started doing, where they wouldn't give enough time for an All Star to build. Um, but Resurrection was so good. I really enjoyed it. It was a lot. There was a lot of references. There was a lot of things in it, but it was such a good art piece that I could not help myself but to love it. I'm really excited for Saint. I love a good pun, so Sigourney Beaver is on my watch list. Bitter Betty. I love the phrase Bitter Betty because I know that's a queer phrase, but I don't know its etymology. I'm also interested in what Jade Julie is going to do, not just because I used to watch Drag Race. So I remember her from Drag Race, but also because her look has this kind of Alice in Wonderland White Rabbit feel. And if she's going like really super mythological with it, and I think it was Alice in Wonderland. I'm not actually sure because I didn't like scroll into the picture. But it looks like it's a White Rabbit thing because it looks like there are different potions and things on her belt. So it's evocative to me of a White Rabbit Alice in Wonderland Alice cosplay thing. So I'm very excited about that. Oh, by the way, my nails are like half done and peeling because I have to redo them for Comic Con because I have to do skeleton nails. So that is why they look a mess. Oh, I just look a mess today. It's just how it is. Okay, more chicken. Be back in a moment. Oh, all right. Okay. Yep. Wrap it this one. Okay. Um. I guess I could talk for a little bit of time about Surf City Donuts itself. Maybe either for people that will watch this later that really want to know, or for posterity. Um, Answer a few questions that I've learned as I've written. Because when I started this project, when did I start this? I don't think my thing will tell me when the first one got saved. But so when I started this, let's say I started 6 months to a year ago. Let's say I started a year ago because that'll sound really impressive to me later. Um, when I started Surf City Dance a year ago, I had this idea. So I had been working on this idea for a TV show for a while, and it had been called Splinterwood. And it had this kind of three brother focus as well, but they didn't know each other at all. And the idea was they would meet throughout the course of the first season. And I took it into a TV writing class, and the 50-minute script I came up with got obliterated by the teacher. Did not like it, did not understand it. Everything was too long. Now, this was a couple years before prestige streaming stuff started happening. So I'd argue now probably that there's an audience for it. I really think there's an audience for it because it had a kind of a fantasy vibe, like not quite Teen Wolf, not quite Vampire Diaries, because nobody was in high school, and I really don't understand that as a trope, by the way. Um, but it had this kind of, fantasy, I guess an angel vibe. It had an angel vibe to it, just because they were all kind of grown ups in that. So for me, I've always been captivated by the idea of found family versus like biological family, I guess. So it was kind of natural to write something about brothers. And over the course of this, I've realized one of those brothers is non binary. So I'm trying to incorporate that well into the story as kind of a teaching point. I do not know if I'm doing it well. So for those of you that are non binary that watch it later, I'm hoping that I resolve any issues that I create because I'm finding out about this character almost in real time as I release the episodes. So I apologize, and I hope that no one feels any pain over that because that was not intentioned at all. I did not expect Mace to be non-binary, which I guess is a spoiler, but it was not something I expected because I started writing this about three brothers, and I did not expect one of them to be non-binary. I guess I should have, should have seen that coming. But a lot of stuff that has happened, I did not necessarily see coming, which is not bad. As a writer, I don't think it's bad to be surprised. I've not spoken to other writers about this, but I find it hard to believe that writers wouldn't get surprised about their work as it changes, especially a larger work. Maybe Stephen King doesn't have that problem, but yeah. So Mace is non-binary, and I'm starting to incorporate that into the story. Not as like that is the only thing his character is, because his character has a lot going on. They are actually quite important in a way, kind of in the supernatural link of things. For those, I have a spoiler coming up. I'm trying not to spoil it because I've written it down, but it hasn't been released yet, so I don't want to spoil it. But there's kind of a major intersection plot point that's coming up with Mace that is really important, and I think will be really good. That's my plan. That's my hope, that it'll be really good. One never knows. Yeah. Yeah. So Mace is kind of described as being like their mom a lot more, and I wanted to do that. I'm not sure why I want to do that, actually. It had to do with the idea of the supernatural being something. I don't want to say more in touch with feminine, but it's kind of a trope of fantasy, especially, is that usually it's the less masculine character that has kind of these really great things with magic, except for Jason Stackhouse in True Blood, but that's an unbelievable character. Still think about that shaving scene every now and then, and I chuckle. I guess it's not fair when you think about like Taboo. I guess Tom Hardy and Taboo. But I get the majority of tropes. Well, maybe not in Something Wicked This Way Comes, but that's a pretty male-dominated book, so I don't know if that really counts. Not that Ray Bradbury's work shouldn't count, but I don't know if that counts in the case of this. Anyways, that's the way that I had felt it had been, and it worked out that I needed the youngest character to kind of have these things with magic, so it could have been Ben or Edgar if I had made Mace the older character. But that's not how it worked out. I'm just going to keep rambling, and maybe eventually I'll get the point across. So you got Mace, who is the youngest, kind of wild, was able to leave Surf City, which is kind of a big deal because most people don't get to do that. Which I have a point to that, by the way. I don't know if people have been noticing the idea of not being able to leave is going to start getting more prevalent as we get into the second half of the episodes. And I really enjoy writing Surf City. Surf City is one of those things where it's such a challenge, but the surprise element makes it worth it. Seeing the story through, because I had the beginning and end, and I had some middle pieces, but I didn't know exactly how I was going to get where I'm going. But everything that has been revealed, every little surprise, most of the details of the story are either going to come up again, or there's something that may come up again in season 2 whenever season 2 comes around. Um, and I may be doing a Kickstarter for season 2 to try to get like some merchandise out there, to see if I can get more attention from more people, just to give it a big try to push it out in the world. Um, it would be great if I could make enough money to pay voice actors, so it's not just me playing all the characters. Because while I love Welcome to Night Vale, that was one thing they had that I don't really have right now is anyone else to do any other character voices, and I'm not really much of a Cecil, and I will fully and honestly admit that, and I think that's okay. I also noticed that is that, so I hope people can hear me. I'm talking to myself, so if people can't hear me, then I'll probably delete this afterwards. But if people can hear me, that's great. I don't know if the little doodad is supposed to be moving or not. It does. I've never done this before, so I can't say. Okay, so we've got Mace, and I can talk more about them. If anyone wants to hear more, of course, feel free to drop questions in the chat. I can't see comments, but I can see the chat. So the chat is the only way that I'll know. I can talk about Edgar. I'll go in reverse order. Edgar is the middle child, but unlike most middle children, Edgar was kind of dad's favored one, as it were. I've talked about this a little bit, not at length to anyone in particular, but I talked a little bit about the idea of body betraying with Edgar, and this is a really interesting concept that I found in college on a show that I was going to assistant direct, but then I graduated. I don't think they ever ended up doing the show. I could be wrong. I don't remember. But so there's this really play called Sons of the Prophet, and in it, you have this guy who was an athlete and just happened to also be gay, and then his body broke down, and so a lot of the play is about him mistrusting his body, about the idea of kind of the thing that you prized about yourself no longer being valuable. And I really loved that. That resonated with me. It was something I hadn't really seen very much before, because you never really see the body breaking down outside of maybe like Cinderella Man, maybe Warrior, definitely just like in boxing movies in general, in some ways. But like in other forms of media, you don't seem to see it as much. I could be wrong. It's very possible I'm wrong. It's okay if I'm wrong. But so the idea of a queer man, especially, and the body breaking down really resonated with me. And so to have a character where their body has kind of betrayed them and is broken for a couple different reasons, which are kind of slowly being revealed as we learn more about the character. We learn more about their addiction. We learn more about kind of the underclass. So there's different layers to Surf City, as I like to think about it. I guess there'd probably be like 4 when I haven't even touched yet. But you have the 3 layers talked about. So we've got like the everyday mundane layer, and then below that we have kind of the VR addiction layer, and then underneath that we have kind of the rest of the supernatural stuff under it. And so kind of this addiction plotline is that kind of second layer. It's a weird small town thing where if you've ever lived in a small town and there's like little pockets of it that have this thing going through it. John Grisham explained it really well. I don't remember which book it was, but it was the one about the guy that runs the newspaper in the small town, and he becomes Christian at the end of the story, which is very, I guess, Anne Rice of John Grisham. Yeah, and so it's the idea of there's these little pockets of things that are kind of underground in the small town. And I gave them a supernatural bent because it's supernatural, and that's a thing that I really thought would be an interesting addition, kind of to small town living. Is it's not just that people are doing drugs; it's that they're doing drugs using like vampire stuff, and so it kind of adds an element to the addiction process, I guess. And again, I'm not writing anything trying to make fun of anyone. So if someone comes across it and they have addiction issues and they feel offended, I apologize for that. I'm trying to write characters honestly, and I have my own life experience, life scope, so I apologize for that. Um, I just want to make sure that nobody feels like I'm like making fun of them. I'm not. I'm trying to write whole characters as best I can. Um, and Edgar just happens to be a former athlete living with an addiction, trying to make their body feel whole at the end of the day. Now, to what ends that is, I don't know exactly yet. That's one surprise I have with Edgar. There's a reveal with Edgar coming up that I've written that hasn't been released yet. That I was a little surprised by, not unpleasantly, as pleasantly surprised when characters reveal themselves to me. Um, and I think Edgar is going to be an interesting character. I have him paired with the sheriff for a couple of different reasons. You're going to see that coming up again in a couple of different ways. Originally, I had wanted to have the sheriff have more contact with Ben, but with all the stuff I was doing with Ben, I felt like Ben had enough things going on because there's a couple of more things going on. And I can't remember what episode has what yet, so I'm trying not to do spoilers, but Ben's relationship with Truist is not what it appears to be. And I think if you've been following the story thus far, you have an idea that something is amiss. And you don't know what it is. I know what it is. Well, I know 90% of what it is. There's a 10% chance I'm completely wrong and I'm going to write something and be like, okay, I guess that wasn't what I thought, but that's what it's going to be. Um, yeah, I don't know. It's really fun. If you're a writer and you're like, yeah, that makes sense, or no, I always know what's going to happen exactly with my characters, chime in the comments or in the chat or however it works. I'm always into that kind of thing. Okay, I'm going to have some more chicken, and then I'm going to post little updates to remind people this is happening. And then I am going to ramble on more, dig myself into more holes as I am wont to do. Yeah, and I'm just going to have lunch. I'll be watching here. I'll be keeping an eye on things. So if people want to chat or whatever, I'm open to listening. I'm taking my headphones off so you don't hear me chilling because that's not the scene. Okay. I do wish there was a way to be like, hey, everyone, come see this now. Uh, is there a way to do that? No. Because it doesn't really give me an option to do this. What's this little... Ooh, there we go. All right. I'm here. I'm rambling. Join me. associate me onto my Twitter. I have no idea how much good that's going to do, or who might be watching who would be interested in that. I really enjoy Twitter, and I really enjoy getting to know artists better. I feel like that's one thing that has been happening, which is really cool. I guess I'll share it on Facebook too. I don't like using my Facebook very much, which really shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. But I don't think I have any of the other things. No, it's weird. They got a whole bunch of stuff, but they don't really have. There's a lot of options, I guess, to do stuff now. Okay. Oh, I don't think I have a way to do this. I want to put something in my Discord thing, but I guess I don't really have a way to. There's no like. Is there a link? If there was a link, I'm gonna feel okay. There we go. Oh, all right. I don't. How do I do that without? Okay, there is a link. See, if you go searching for things, you generally find them. Whatever floats your boat. Oh, no idea if anybody will join me. I don't necessarily anticipate that people will, but I like to give people the option. I'd like people to join me. One of the things about writing, I don't think that we talk about a lot, and I'll talk about Ben after I'm done with this little diatribe. Um, is the fact that writing is not as solitary as a lot of kind of our writing forebears would have us believe. And this real concept in high school about writing as being the super solitary kind of non-communal thing. You put out a book, the book gets reviewed, it's either good or it's bad, and then people buy it or they don't. It wasn't until I started really seriously writing in theater, it wasn't until I kind of accepted my calling as it is, um, that I realized how communal writing is. And so when people take time out to either participate in my work as an actor, as an audience, as an editor, I am more than appreciative of that, because writing really is a communal thing. Yes, it might be an idea that comes from my head, but that idea was influenced by something I saw in a way, either in childhood or recently. Like if I were to do a kind of detox cult thing, I might use something from Nine Perfect Strangers, which I've been watching, which I have some thoughts on that I'd be happy to share or not. Um, and it just really struck me. I think it should have struck me probably even if I weren't writing and I was only a passive viewer of things that I like I'd been when I was a kid. Um, Reading the retrospective on the Golden Girls and about how much each of them kind of in their own way fought for LGBT rights and what that meant for the concept of the show, I think is something to be aware of how much the things we love and the things we produce linger, and how when you write, it's not a singular thing. It's a community event, and that is actually good. That is better than it being a singular thing. Because if it's a singular thing, um, then it's not really as powerful as it could be. I'd almost argue a singular thing in a way isn't art. I mean, it is because it's creatively produced, so it fits the definition in its own way. But I think I think for writing to be effective, there has to be a community that enjoys it, that comes alongside it, that really invests into it. And Surf City Donuts is something I want to see grow into that, and maybe it will. I'd like it to. I'd like it to be kind of a part of what I've done as far as plays go. I'd like it to be, well received. It doesn't have to become as big as Welcome to Night Vale. I'd like that, but um, I'm also trying to be realistic. I want more people to see my work, really, at the end of the day. Because that's the only way to get better is to go through the quote unquote mortifying ordeal of being known. It's very easy to write a play. It's very hard to put that play into action, really, and things. And here's a fun fact: I hate the sound of my own voice in a lot of ways. So actually, sitting down, recording, and listening to my recording back is like the cringiest part of the Surf City process. Also, sometimes you don't see it. Sometimes I have to record episodes like 3 or 4 times because I write words and then I say those words and they don't come off my tongue naturally all the time. All right. Um, yeah, so we talk a little about Edgar. I don't want to talk too much about Edgar only because yes, things coming up and I don't want to spoil them because I've written them, but like I said, they're not out in the universe yet. Um, but Edgar is very important. Edgar is going to become more important. Um, and as the middle brother, I didn't just want it to be the brother that gets ignored because they're the middle brother, and I don't know. There's a place for that, I guess. Modern Family kind of did that with the gay kid dynamic in a way. I think I could be wrong about that, but I feel like that's kind of what they went through with Jay learning to understand his adult gay son. That's my perspective on it, and it's been a while since I've watched that show, so that's kind of my perspective on it, though. Um, yeah, so we can talk about Ben. Ben is the oldest brother. I have a visual in mind for Ben. Um, so I kind of know what he looks like more than I know what Edgar looks like. I have a visual for Edgar and a visual for Mace, but they're not quite as strong as Ben. Ben was the first character. Ben was how I knew what I was going to start with. I have this really interesting concept of the idea of responsibility and what that means, and the idea of sacrifice on a small scale and what that means. Um, for me, Ben, it was important to show an older brother that took his responsibility seriously. And I think I've done that. But there's also things about Ben that are purposely written to be a little off. He's almost too accepting of responsibility. And I'm kind of starting to show how that pressure is cracking him at an older age. But he has kind of a Dean Winchester vibe to him, but he's not Dean Winchester in any way. Um, and I think Ben, for me, is one of those characters where I guess maybe even as a writer, I've idealized them a little bit. Maybe I haven't made them as imperfect as they could be. But this whole season, really, in a way, is about Truist coming home and about Ben learning about himself more, in spite of the things um, that he's been given a responsibility toward. Yeah, and that's all I can really say without giving it up, because I know where I'm going, but the issue is not spoiling it. Which normally I wouldn't be someone who makes a big deal out of spoilers, because for me, I will still enjoy seeing the journey if I even know the destination. But because there's so many little twists to what I know I'm writing, I don't want to spoil it because I want it to be a surprise. It's not a surprise to me. I know where I'm going, but some of the twists getting there, I don't actually know yet. I have, yeah, and some of the surprise has been to how some of the secondary characters have come out of the woodwork too in Surf City, and I think that that's really important to acknowledge. Is that it's a show about three brothers, but the three brothers don't exist in a vacuum. They exist in context of community, and so in a way, I had to build a really strong community character in order to make that all kind of work. And this is where my I don't want to call it expertise because I don't want to sound like I'm showing off, but my expertise in world building, kind of my ability to do it, made Surf City slightly easier to make happen than it might have been for some other writers who might have needed more collaboration. I'm not saying other people can't do this because Lord knows, you know, writers do amazing things all the time. But, in this time and place with the person I am as the writer I am right now, we're building and narrative structure being one of my skill sets. Um, Surf City really started to kind of come together for me. And it's not saying I don't struggle, but I know what I'm doing with the idea of the cosmic, with the idea of trouble, and with the idea of kind of Surf City itself as between them in a way. Surf City is not purgatory. If anyone later on comes to that conclusion, that is an erroneous conclusion. Just because people have trouble leaving the town does not mean it's purgatory. I did read Dante's Inferno recently, and I am using that for something for an upcoming project. Um, but Surf City is not purgatory for people that stumble upon this later and have drawn that conclusion. I love that conclusion. I've dropped clues to that conclusion, but that is not actually what it is. Um, and I'm sorry. If you read it that way and it's more exciting for you, I'm totally not going to stop you from reading it that way. But that's not really what it is. I guess I could talk a little bit about. I'm afraid if I talk about Tourist or if I talk about Varric, that I'm going to drop hints to something, and I don't really want to, even for people watching this later. So that's kind of all I'm going to say about Surf City for now. I can talk about the back half of the episodes. I just dropped. It feels so weird to say I just did it because Tuesday feels like decades ago, as well as like 2 days ago at the same time. Um, but in episode 6, we're starting to see kind of the deepening of the show because it took 2 or 3 episodes really make Surf City seem real enough that I could start veering off of the explaining things. Now there's still things to explain. Like if you look at like Gilmore Girls, we got the idea of Stars Hollow, but we didn't really start to get the idea of Chilton until after Rory had been there for a few days and until after uh, Lorelai started to kind of become part of the Chilton life. So it's or if you watch The Nanny and you realize their house changed between the pilot and the second episode, it's like that, where you just really don't know until you've actually started creating. So I don't remember where I was going with that. I think I was talking about kind of the structure of the world, which I think we'll leave it at that for that, unless somebody has a question about it. I am watching the chat and I'm watching the little people. And the little like button, and we'll see. So I'm gonna have my third piece of chicken, and then I'm done with the food. You won't have to hear me gnawing on anything anymore. So I'm sorry if you've been hearing that. I'm hoping the headphones kind of mitigate that, but Lord knows if that's what you got. I wish I had a little clip of me eating so you wouldn't have to go through all that, but there you go. Um, so I've talked about Surf City. I could talk about more. I could talk about Surf City at length because I can just start talking and ramble. And honestly, I don't always know where it's going to go when I start talking. But I figure I've got this time. I've got this kind of platform. And I'm going to talk whether or not people join, which, hello to anyone joining, either in life or later. Thank you for joining this. I'm trying to keep an eye too to see if anybody is like, where is the stream? Which is possible, but it is also lunchtime or for people on different time zones. For time. But I can talk forever, so it's not a big deal. So I've got Surf City is in the works. I also have my gay novellas that I've been working on, which is really fun. So for the people that don't know, kind of my history as a writer, I started out writing fan fiction. I actually started out writing Buffy fan fiction, and my favorite pairing to write was Xander and Angel, which was a lot of fun. It was a very small but mighty community. I feel like. Um, Especially when Buffy was still on the air. I feel like there were Buffy Faith shippers, and that were kind of bigger. And Angel Spike Buffy was big, of course. I was never a big Spike fan. I feel like if I watched the show now, I'd probably have different feelings, but because it was done by Joss Whedon, I have a hard time watching it, knowing kind of person he is. Um, but it was a very big deal at the portion of my life when it was on and I was watching it. Um, and so I used to do fanfiction.net a lot. My stories are actually still there if anyone's interested in reading them. Not all of them are good, but they're all interesting. And so I have a lot of CSI fic up there as well, which was a lot of fun. Um, I did a couple of Glees because I did Glee for a while. I've got I did some from Oz because I liked the pairing of Beecher and Keller. I thought that was a really interesting combination of characters, especially because it feels like, especially Tobias Beecher was really different from the actor who played him. I could be off base about that, but it feels like from the director cast commentary um, that the actor who played Tobias was slightly more exuberant than Tobias himself as a character. Um, yeah, so I did fan fiction for a long time, and this was, I guess, I started all the way back in 2007, probably. I mean, I did it off and on. Like, it wasn't like a thing that I did every day. For a long time, it wasn't a thing I did every day. Then it was for a long time, a thing I did every day. But in 2007, I was trying to resolve, a lot of the feelings I was having. I was going to church at the time, and also being um, knowing I was gay, but not knowing quite what I could do about it if I wanted to do anything. I kind of, I don't think it's something we talk about much in the gay experience, but I have, for a long time when I was younger, it wasn't about resolving it, but it was the peaks and valleys of how do I deal with this versus a religious belief. Um, and kind of horrible to say, how do I deal with this? Because it's not something we dealt with. But that was how I felt at the time. And kind of for me, it was either I can do church or I can do the gay thing kind of thing. And that was the resolve. And so there were periods of time where there'd be a lot of shame and anger. There were periods of time where I wouldn't be at church at all, and I would be openly gay, and it wasn't a big deal, you know, to me internally. But it was never like a solid thing. I never really felt at peace with it myself for a while. And fan fiction really helped me to start to work through that. It didn't help me to discover kink. I did discover kink a little bit because of fan fiction, because when I want to write something that is a little more sexualized in a way, I like to make sure it's accurate to to a degree. Which I've seen some people write stuff that was not, and I'm like, that's fine, I guess. But I like a little bit of grounding in my fantasy, even in flash pairings. So, you know, in a way, without writing, I'm not quite sure if I ever would have really grappled with it fully. Because I have kind of that story, like other people who who just choose not to have this big grand coming out with the family. Like I didn't have that. I was very cavalier about that, being like, it doesn't matter. Um, but it actually did kind of matter, and I probably should have, and I should have made more of an effort. But that is neither here nor there. That is just what it is as part of my story. But so I think, kind of in some of my writing, you can see how I grapple with that. Because I tend to write, in some ways, characters that are either really wise or really naive. It's really one of those things where if I think about the characters I write, because Angel Xander was this way. Xander was naive, wisecracking, and scared, and Angel was kind of this like strong, wise, older man type. It was very much that. Um, what's really interesting is I was talking to my friend about this, about the idea of age difference in film, and we were talking about, like Mulligans, for instance. I brought up Mulligans, which is about an older man having a sexual awakening with his son's best friend, and I was kind of, in fan fiction we have that a lot of the time, especially, and this may be not so obvious in other pairings, but especially with Angel Xander, because a lot of what Angel and Xander met commonplace do take place before Xander's out of high school. And I didn't think about that at the time, and it did not occur to me, and it's just occurring to me now, um, about the idea of that kind of fan fiction playing a role in filling in the stories that we don't necessarily see a lot of. It's an interesting thing to think about, because it's the idea of, when you look at queer media, most of the time it's people of the same age, um, or it's a later in life story, like Beginners, which is kind of different. I guess Queer as Folk is probably the exception, but because there was a point to it, it's one of those things where it's like, I don't remember how old. I always forget his character's name. I don't remember how old the Randy Harrison character was supposed to be in Queer as Folk. But I don't remember it being a big deal in this universe either. I don't think it was a big deal for, like, even Debbie, um, who's one of the best queer ally characters that's ever been created. Um, yeah, and so it's the idea of writing a openly queer male identified character, because I know it can be different for trans people, and because I'm not lesbian, I don't tend to write a lot of lesbians, which I probably should write more of. But I do have some really great lesbian characters. If anybody wants to do one of my musicals, I have a really great lesbian pairing in one of my musicals. It's the idea of media not showing the idea of a younger queer person having a crush on someone that's older. Like, not in the same way they show, because you have the idea of, like, Fast Times at Ridgemont High. I can think of immediately that Stacy's Mom song. You don't really have a gay version of that, which is something kind of interesting to think about, and how kind of fan fiction fills like that. Now I did think about this. There was a character on The Fosters who came out as gay, and he was like 11 or 12. I guess that is what it was, which is not talked about. The idea of coming out as gay that young. I think Tatiana from Drag Race is the only person who's ever talked about coming out. Tatiana said they came out in like fifth grade or something like that. But besides for a really chaste kiss, I don't think, because I don't know how late that fell in the series or how much airtime that character got, you don't really ever see younger gay man developing feelings and going after someone older. The only time you see it that I can think of, even in immediate pop culture, is probably Kurt from Glee. And for a long time, I had an issue with this character for how he threw himself at Finn. It made me really uncomfortable, probably because I saw some myself in that. Not that I actually did that to the extent, but there were some uncomfortable things that they had written for Kurt from Glee do. But like that's the only time, and it's kind of like an uncomfortable version of the Predator trope, like all flipped on his head from the 50s. And I don't know. It's interesting to think about the idea of identity and how desire forms and why certain stories are perfectly fine, and especially coming of age tales with older women, younger men work really well, especially in like country music. I'm thinking of that Garth Brooks song, which is basically about being seduced by an older woman. But you don't get a lot of that um, for for gay folks. At least not in mainstream. You see a little bit of it on adult sites, but it's not really done on adult sites well. I mean, it's all about the act as, and I'm censoring myself for YouTube, so that's why I'm not using full words here because I'm trying to be very aware of the platform I'm on. But it's not, because desire isn't always about sex necessarily, I guess is the only way that I can think to put it. And if all you're looking at is at adult sites to fill that desire, you're going to get some wrong ideas about how it works. Because then there's also the idea of having a crush, which can eventually go away. The idea of needing a mentor, which is really difficult to touch on well. Going back to Troop 274, which is one of the plays that I've written, there were people that got really enraged about the idea of a closeted gay mentor. And perhaps it was the presentation, perhaps not just, but it felt like it wasn't presentation so much as it was the idea, the audacity of a gay man in any capacity being around kids, even explicitly said and made clear in the script that nothing untoward was happening with anyone underage. Like people were still like enraged. And I think about that when I think about, because I think about how far still to go. Because if a place, because where I live is considered liberal, which I don't know if I agree with, but it's considered liberal. And the art scene struggling with that, but like, I just think about the fact that the villain of that story was supposed to be the absent father, and it ended up being the gay mentor to a lot of the straight people that were listening in. And it wasn't that they were like actively malicious, but just an awareness of the idea of mentorship for them automatically crosses the line to wrongdoing. And I think this is a part where adult sites play into this because that's automatically where it goes. And that's not often what it is. In fact, really, in a way, I'm of the age where I should have a mentor, but most of the people that could mentor me have passed away from AIDS, essentially, the whole generation lost. And so I never had a mentor that I could have had. And at some point, I'm going to be expected to probably be a mentor to someone. And that's really quite an interesting thing to feel. I think ideally that's the hope too, because you don't want to go through your life alone, especially when you're gay, because even though gay is becoming more more accepted. I don't want to call it mainstream, but I don't know what else to call it. It's becoming something that's effortless and easier for kids to do as the years go on. But it was not easy. Like, I was born in 86. So even if you think about people like me that are on the older end of the millennial scale, it was not easy for me. We really didn't have a lot of like people to look at. There was no, and even if there was fan fiction back then, there was no real, um, there was no AO3 or fanfiction.net. In fact, when the internet began, most fan fiction happened on singular sites, on like GeoCities and AngelFire, right? So there wasn't a centralized location. And so you have to think about, except for maybe Interview with the Vampire, and I don't know if this is as explicit in the movie as it is in the book, the idea of queerness on screen really wasn't seen. Not in any way that was like viable, because you had like in Revenge of the Nerds, you had the one kid that was queer, openly queer, and he was kind of this weird sissification, almost like a carnival mirror version of queer person. Not that there can't be femme queer people. There are obviously femme queer males, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. If that's who you are, if that's who you choose to express yourself, if that's what brings you joy and brings joy to others in your community. But it felt more like a caricature and less than a really fully realized person. And as a fully realized person, he didn't really even get to be with anyone. And you think about movies like Weekend at Bernie's, where you have one of the main plot points is that if you haven't seen Weekend at Bernie's, it may not hold up now as well as you'd hope it did. Because one of the plot points is that the two guys that find Bernie dead, they are basically in the fake life ending note that the guy leaves that's trying to frame them. Um, it's about them being gay and not being able to handle it, and that is rough. I did not realize, because I had never seen Mannequin, that the Misach Taylor character was such an open, proud, vivacious, feminine queer man, and I'm really kind of sad I didn't know about that. But like in Police Academy, it was played for a joke. Um, one of the one of the Police Academy movies, I don't remember which one. Um, and so I think people don't realize that to have any sort of queerness on TV that's not just camp is still relatively new. And something about, because the way that I write, it's not going to be a way that someone writes in 20 years, because things are so commonplace. Like, I don't think we can ever really overstate the revolutionary act that was Will and Grace, the first one, not the reboot, rehash, whatever you want to call it. But it was a revolutionary act to have someone as, I don't want to use this word, but straight acting as Will. I think he's the first that I can think of that was like that, because there were no gay doctors on like ER. There were not really even any queer characters on cult TV like Pushing Daisies or Third Rock from the Sun. Even on Third Rock from the Sun, where they were aliens, they all chose to be heterosexual on Earth. Which is one of those things where you have to bear in mind, for a long time, we were punchlines outside of stuff that we could control. So like Billy's first Hollywood screen kiss, Some of Us, Bedrooms and Hallways, Priscilla, Tu Wong Fu, which just had an anniversary. I think it just had an anniversary. It had a big anniversary like last year, and its anniversary is around now. And then The Queen, which was a documentary I finally saw. But I mean, even some of the movies that we made about ourselves, like in the 70s, you go see retrospectives at gay film festivals, did not have happy endings in any way, shape, or form. And there were no real gay characters in even horror films. I mean, you got eccentric characters and femme characters, and you got Vincent Price being very European, but I mean, there were really no openly queer. Um, there weren't really even openly queer superheroes for a very long time either. Um, and this is me going off on a tangent about things. I'm not really talking about my work anymore, but um, it's something I kind of think about how when people create arts, either visual art or doing fan fiction, um, I think about how we've taken the idea of the queerness of a Disney villain like Gaston and made them actually gay. And I think there's both liberation and a little dishonesty in that celebration. I think it's a very fine line to write. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I actually think it's quite funny. But like if you got into the scholarship of it, I do wonder what that would say about kind of fulfilling that prediction. Um, I don't think I'm going anywhere specific with that. But when I kind of ramble, this is where my thought process goes. And it all kind of relates back to my own writing because of everything I've internalized, you know? And I think because for so long I internalized gay is bad because what I saw of it on TV didn't really seem very appealing. It seemed like very, except for Will and Grace for a long time, it didn't seem like a big barrel of laughs. Um, so that's kind of been internalized in my work and in work of people my age, people of a certain age. I mean, it's something I don't take for granted is being able to write a character in a world that is effortlessly and safely queer. And I think that's something that resonates with people that enjoyed Schitt's Creek because they went there with that. And so, in a way, Surf City probably has a little bit of that there, if only because I didn't want to write a world where um, I've already got vampires in the universe. Having gay be an issue is not really even an issue, and it should never really be an issue. Um, and my internet's going weird, so I hope that that's not a. I really hope that's not a thing. Where am I going with this? Yeah, I think it's something to think about because now when I'm at work, I'm kind of beyond the coming out story, which is something that as a gay writer, I had to learn how to kind of write my way out of and not make every story into a coming out story. Not that they're not important, not they still don't have a place. I mean, I didn't realize how much I would be affected by a coming out story until I actually saw Love Simon and the conversation he has with his dad, where his dad hugs him, like full on tears. Like I just like bawled for like 5 minutes, and I had no idea that it was going to affect me because I don't really write that in my stories anymore. I wanted to do other work in other spheres of queer writing. Um, but I think it is really still important. I took it for granted myself. I said, why are we still writing these type of movies? I mean, what has to be said needs to be said. But it turned out even I needed that. And it's not something we should take for granted. And it's just not something that appears in my writing much anymore. But I think it's something that people should consider and think about. In a way, too, writing an openly queer world is harder. I've read some gay male romance where everybody in fictionalized 1890 or whatever was openly gay and everyone was fine with it. And that kind of also feels nonsensical to me because you can't root it in time and place where it definitely was not safe, nor did they have that vocabulary. But like you can write an alternate universe where it's 1890 and everything is okay. Like one of my gay novellas has this steampunk bent to it where being gay is underground, but it's not because it's not accepted. It's because it's more fun that way. And that has a little bit of a Berlin Folsom Street Fair feel to it, which is really fun. I think it's part of what I like about Dragula is the idea of kind of fun and underground, not underground because it's unsafe to be gay above ground, but underground because queer is kind of more fun when you have more freedom to explore and you're not kind of subjugated to the heterosexual experience. And I think that's something in writing where you have to learn a lot about. I wrote about it in Triangles, a queer musical, which is a musical I'm working on. You can see on my new play exchange. I don't have a composer. I'm not very good writing music myself. Like I could probably do it, but it would be a struggle, and I'd be talking about this like 10 years down the line. Um, so if anybody wants to be the Hammerstein to my Rogers, or the Rogers to my Hammerstein, I'm looking for a composer. But there's this really great conversation about the idea of not weaponizing sexuality and not shaming someone when it suits your purposes. And the idea of what does it mean to be proud as a gay man? What does it mean to be sexual, both in a world that accepts you and in the world that doesn't, and the dichotomy of that? And because I think sex is important to my work, I don't tend to write asexual characters, which is probably something I should get better about, because I want to be able to help all people represent themselves. Um, but I think for me, for so long, because it was repressed, that I tend to just write sexual characters. I, I think there's kind of a thing in the queer community where you either have to be sexual or you have to be completely non-sexual. And I don't think that's correct. And I'm speaking for myself from my own experiences. So take from this what you will. But the way that, especially the queer experience, has been commodified, I think the only person I've ever seen that really, I've seen a couple artists that have done this well on Instagram, um, where they both do sexualized, but then they also do that kind of playful monogamy thing. But generally, it feels like when I look at queerness in media these days, and self imposed media especially, it feels like when you're sexualized but also monogamous, it's still a revolutionary act. Like it feels like, and this could just be me talking, I could be reading this completely wrong, which is fine, but it feels like you either have to choose to be monogamous and completely much an old school gay prude, or you have to be completely out there with your sexuality at all times. And I do not help because I lust after people the way that other people lust. Um, so I'll freely admit that I am part of the problem. But I wonder if we've ever discovered how to really take power and control of our sexuality. Because in my writing, sometimes I feel like I do a really good job of that. Sometimes I feel like I let it get away from me, either for good or for ill. Sometimes in trying to make a point, I have to go places and then walk it back in editing. And this is something other writers know, is that sometimes stuff that you either like or dislike gets left on the cutting room floor, either for the sake of story or because it only makes sense to you. And your readers are like, I don't understand this. And there's no way to explain it without adding half an hour to your story time. Um, yeah. Yeah. And I don't know what all that was. And I don't know how acceptable any of that diatribe was, or if I'm completely talking out of my um, completely talking out of my butt. But yeah, that is kind of how I feel like in my writing, in trying to write worlds that are cohesive and trying to write openly gay characters, I have to consider if the world was ever hostile to gay characters and how that played out. Like it's not something I can take for granted in writing. It's not effortless. And I think sometimes in science fiction and dystopian writing, people understand this. The Wild Cards anthology, the X-Men series. I think there's an understanding of that when writing. Is the idea of hiding and coming out, the idea of acceptance and fighting for acceptance, the idea of what that means. I think the X-Men really gets it, which is probably why so many of us queer people love the X-Men, and because of the costumes from 1993 and the Bobby and Logan scene from the 99 movie. And everyone knows which scene I'm talking about because, yeah. Um, yeah, I don't know where I was going with that because every time I think about the scene, I just kind of stop and get stuck for a few minutes. Oh, it was 12:15. I also have Comic Con coming up this weekend, which I'm fairly excited about. I have been working on my costume quite diligently. Every costume I do gets a little better too. I had one costume one year that I got really excited about. It was picture perfect, but I couldn't move in it. And so I ended up not being able to take it to Comic Con because I couldn't even get to the bus stop to get on the bus to go to Comic Con. And that made me really sad. And that was my Megazord costume. I was really sad because I worked a long time on that costume and I really loved it. But for the costumes I can successfully move that I can get to Comic Con in, I feel like I get better the more that I do them. And that's something else that's been really great to see is kind of the queerness of Comic Con coming into itself. Like like being able to see Dave Lazaroff or Pineapple Breads at Comic Con and purchase queer art from them. Like you can't take that kind of thing for granted because it wasn't always the case. It wasn't always the way. And I could be wrong. Comic Con could have always been welcoming. Of course, some of the first fan fiction was Kirk Spock from Star Trek, which is still not my bearing, but you know, whatever makes you happy. Um, it's been really cool to see how people approach cosplay, and I think it's a really important kind of step in art. Um, and I'm very excited for this Comic Con because I've made my own sword, which I am very excited about. This is the first time I've ever made a sword. Um, and I was going for an antique look, so if you see pictures of it later, it's supposed to look like that. Um, which is maybe not a good addendum, but I am super excited about it. It means a lot to me to honor the things I love by adorning them on my body and then traipsing into a convention center hall with 5 million other people. I don't want to spoil it, but if you are following me on any of my things, I'll post pictures on them because I'm very proud of this one in particular. It is not the Ghastly Grinner costume. I'm doing that next year, if only because it's going to take me more time learning how to sew. Much like Shangela, I don't have a ton of sewing experience, so a lot of what I do is E6000 or modified pieces I find at thrift shops that I cut up and do things with. But my plan for next year is definitely to do the Ghastly Grinner costume because I think at that point too my makeup will be better skill wise. And I get to do a lot of really fun things with makeup. I get to do a lot of skeleton stuff with makeup this year. So I get to do a lot of black, white, and grayscale with a bit of red. So I'm very excited about it. Yeah, love Comic Con. Comic Con's great. That's how I meet some of the artists that I get stuff from that I don't see otherwise. That's where my Sailor Mercury wand, which I don't have in front of me, I have a Sailor Mercury wand bottle opener thing that I got at Comic Con a couple years ago that I think is just the bee's knees. Um, yeah, the only problem with Comic Con is how much money I have to save. Like, it's not Christmas for me, but it's pretty darn close. Also, that's where, because I now have the Heroes of the Grid and a couple of expansion packs, like if any of the comic places have any of the Heroes of the Grid stuff, I can add that, which is really nice. When I go to Comic Con, a lot of times I don't go to see any specific celebrities. I am this year. I'm very excited that Austin St. John and Christina Ricci are going to be at my Comic Con. And I'm hoping to get them to autograph things, but we'll see if they're there when I'm there, because you never know. Um, yeah, I'm having Christina Ricci sign my Casper DVD. By the way, I had this big internal thing with my friends about if I should have her sign Adam's Family or Casper, and we looked it up, and I think I discovered Adam's Family came before Casper, but because she was the carrier for Casper more, I think that's what I want to have her shine. I'm a fan of her stuff outside of that, but I think Casper is an excellent movie, an excellent Halloween movie, really an excellent any time of year movie. Um, if you never saw Casper, it's pretty affordable now on DVD. I would say it's worth a watch. Um, if you want any recommendations for movies that are worth a watch, I can try to be useful in that. Um, Lord knows I've watched enough of them myself. Not as much so much anymore, but yeah. Let's see. There's other stuff to talk about. It is 12:20. I think I'm gonna probably end at 12:30 because there's no one here, and I feel like I'm just gonna kind of keep rambling anyways. But for people that are watching this later, um, I hope you learned something about stuff. Surf City, what I've got coming up on the back half of Surf City. We're gonna get more into the relationship between the brothers and why it broke apart, and the reason behind that. Because the reason that they don't always get along is not necessarily reasons that are in their control. There are characters we've met and characters that are behind the scenes, that are kind of controlling things. I'm bringing in Julie a lot more. Julie has a bigger role, I think, coming up in the second season. Now, I don't want to. I want to preface that with saying I don't know exactly what's going to happen. Um, but I can easily see Julie becoming a much stronger character. I have ideas and plans for her. I have ideas and plans also for Martha, the town planner, that I think you met in episode 4. Varric Omer um, has bigger plot stuff coming. It was hinted at, but it's going to be fully realized. They are actually quite important to the plot in their own way. It's a sexually ambiguous small town sheriff that definitely is not Joe Manganiello look like has yes. Oh gosh, I lost my train of thought. Now I'm imagining Joe Manganiello as the sheriff, so I lost my train of thought. I apologize. Um, yeah, I think for me, when I think about writing Surf City, I think about the idea that it's not just about a small town supernatural event. It's not just Sunnydale where it's contained, or Welcome to Night Vale where it's contained until it's not. Because the idea that Surf City is Surf City and it has a place, but that there are always supernatural things happening all around it, it doesn't hear about because they're happening elsewhere. When Mace talks about other places being just like Surf City, it's not just a euphemism. Like, the idea for me of the supernatural is slightly more Ray Bradbury than it is Joss Whedon, in that it can really happen anywhere and any time. And, people always tell themselves stories about the other and about things that scare them. And in a way, I think we sometimes speak these things into existence for good or for ill. Like the idea of the Candyman series, the idea of basically any Jordan Peele movie is taking who we are and the stories we tell ourselves and the stories we don't tell ourselves because we fear them, kind of these logical physical manifestation conclusions. Like, when I think about the Hotel Cortez from American Horror Story or Briarcliff Asylum, I think easily that is important storytelling. Maybe it's not seen all the way through, and maybe it comes through on the strength of acting ability and on set design, not necessarily as well as story does, which I know is sometimes complaints people have about Ryan Murphy shows, which I have some of the complaints about that are similar. Not to say there's anything wrong with that. Ryan Murphy, if you want to work together, call me. I have some ideas. I think you'd like them. It's very shameless of me. Because we tell ourselves these stories, and I think, especially as people that are queer, probably queer identified people understand that more because we've seen both the greatness and the ugliness of the world in a lot of ways. And I think it's something we shouldn't deny in our writing.
I think the idea that a town would be so isolated and have it be the only place where supernatural things are happening is kind of a silly idea. Like the idea that things aren't interconnected and no tourists ever come through Surf City, like at all, like I can't see that happening. Like I think it's one of the few things about it that I liked about the second part of the book was how there were ramifications out in the world for the things that happened in Derry. Like you couldn't hide Derry. Like you can't hide Carrie, for instance, you know. And then I think it went too far, but that's just me. Yeah. So my hope for Surf City is that more people will listen to it, will enjoy it, will have buy-in, will have questions. I mean, I am not against people telling me what they think about it and what they think will happen in season two, because it's a possibility that if it's a great train of thought, maybe I'll work it into the series, or maybe it'll be something that I'll be like, not really, and I'll try to resolve that so that you're still respected, but that there are certain things that I definitely want to have happen, and I haven't built season two yet, but I know there will be a season two. That's my hope. Um, my hope, obviously, too, is to be able to have a Kickstarter for it at some point. Though, what that looks like and when that'll be, who knows? Because I'm likely to do a Kickstarter for my musicals first and try to get that off the ground. Musicals are very expensive if you've never tried to make one yourself, because I've written the show and I'm rewriting the show because it's always an editing process. But like just to have it set to music is at least 2 grand, because I want to pay other artists for their time, and then you got to pay actors. You got to have a space where you can do it in. You have got a space for rehearsals, and the more people you've got in the cast, the more expensive it gets. So it's easily even just a stage reading of a musical, like a sit down, everybody sings their parts. That's a 3-4 grand process at that point, and it's one of those things where I just have to be honest, and I can't do it without people coming along to help. And I'm going to be honest about that. Like, I, you know, I love writing, and it's just one of those things where I want to be able to tell the queer stories my way. And if you've read any of my novellas, or if you've read my fan fiction, or if you've gotten fiction from me as a Christmas birthday gift or something like that, then you know how big the worlds are that I build and what I'm capable of. And, I have these great plans in mind for the things that I do. And I don't really do anything by half measures. Um, and it's really fun to try. Part of the joy of creation is, the joy of production itself, of having this thing that I'm working on that I can put out in the universe and people can come along and enjoy and listen to and vibe with. Um, and my hope is that you've been able to enjoy and vibe. And if you haven't enjoyed but you vibed, or if you've enjoyed but haven't vibed, that I can get you there. And vibing can also be included with questioning, or with having reactions, not like panic attack reactions, but like just reactions to the work and the questions and the thoughts it poses. Because if my work isn't at least a little provocative, then it's not really pushed far enough. And I've had this conversation about doing a gay Cinderella musical. Like, is it being gay enough of a difference in Cinderella? But there's still other things I've done to it, added in humor, audience participation, created different catalysts, and a great female villain with a great couple of female villain songs, which I know some particular actors have said they really enjoy the thought of. So I always hope that my work will not just be something that you can be passive about. Not that being passive is a bad thing, not that just sitting there and listening is fine, because sometimes I just put on Welcome to Night Vale and I just passively enjoy it while I do other things. But I want it to be something you can come back to when you're being active about it and it's thoughtful, and you can go, huh, huh. And that would be really cool if people start going to like fan conventions and doing art of it. Like I wouldn't be mad about that. Like, what does the Dragon Wing pub look like to you? You know, kind of thing. Um, and that's my hope for the second half of the first season is really, pushing it out there and giving people a reason to listen and go back and kind of look at the scaffolding of the world that I've built. And now I've built the scaffolding enough that we go out in the world and actually explore the world together. Because I'm still learning about it as I write it, even in episode 9. Um, and I want to thank you. My work is very precious to me, and I hope it's precious to you. And I want to thank you for being a part of it, whether you're listening to this live, whether you're finding it later, whether this is 10 years down the road and I have even less hair than I do now. Um, I want to thank you for being a part of the experience, and I hope that you find something in my work that resonates with you and your experience of queerness, however you experience it. Um, and I want to thank you, and I will have a new episode up. I will have episode 7, Inescapable Part 2, will be up in 2 weeks' time, which is really exciting for me. Thank you, everyone, and I'm going to end the stream. It's been an hour and a half of pleasure of listening to myself talk. And if you're at Rose City Comic Con and you see me in my costume, don't feel afraid to say hello. Bye.